Hello, ladies and gentlemen, craft spirit enthusiasts, and those interested in the intoxicating world of craft distilleries, cideries, meaderies, wineries, and the occasional foray into breweries. It's Rich Shane, and welcome to Fermented Adventure, the podcast, where we bring you the fascinating people that are making the mash, fermenting, distilling, bottling, pouring, and delivering to you some of the finest libations in the world. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items. Thank you for bringing the podcast into wherever you are and whatever you're doing. We truly are grateful that you have chosen to listen and make us part of your day. It would mean the world to us if you left a 5-star review. This helps us climb in the rankings, and it makes it easier for others to find us. Don't hesitate to leave us your comments as well. If the podcast didn't meet your expectations, tell us why. We're always striving to improve. You can find us at fermentedadventure.com. We are on Instagram and Facebook as Fermented Adventure. Email us at fermentedadventure@gmail.com. All right, FA Nation, let's meet our guests. In honor of President's Day, we're diving into the fascinating relationship between some of America's presidents and their involvement with spirits, both as connoisseurs and producers. From George Washington's entrepreneurial distilling endeavors to the personal drinking preferences of other United States presidents, this episode uncovers the spirited side of history. George Washington wasn't just the first United States president, he was also a pioneer in American distilling. In 1797, Washington was approached by his Scottish farm manager, James Anderson, who convinced him that Mount Vernon had the perfect conditions for a profitable distillery. With abundant grain, a working grist mill, and a natural water source, Washington decided to enter the whiskey business. In 1799, Washington's distillery had become one of the largest whiskey producers in the young nation, producing about 11,000 gallons per year. His rye whiskey recipe included 60% rye, 35% corn, and 5% malted barley. Unlike many distilleries today, which age their whiskey for years, Washington's spirits were typically sold unaged, making them a form of what we now call white whiskey or white dog. Today, Mount Vernon honors this legacy with a fully reconstructed working distillery on its original site. Visitors can witness 18th century distilling methods and even purchase bottles of George Washington's rye whiskey made using their traditional techniques. We had an incredible opportunity to interview Steve Bayshore, Director of Historic Trades at Mount Vernon, who shared deep insights into Washington's distilling operation, the historical reconstruction, and what it takes to keep this legacy alive. You can check out our full conversation in episode 50 of Fermented Adventure, the podcast. While Washington focused on whiskey, Thomas Jefferson was a passionate advocate for wine. As the American minister to France, Jefferson was introduced to Europe's finest wines, particularly those from Bordeaux, Burgundy, and the Rhone Valley. Upon returning to the United States, he attempted to establish his own vineyard at Monticello. Jefferson's dream was to produce high-quality European-style wines in Virginia, but the American climate and native pests, particularly the Phylloxera luce, prevented his vines from thriving. Despite his personal failures in winemaking, Jefferson's influence helped to shape America's appreciation for fine wine. Today, Monticello remains an important landmark in American viniculture, and Jefferson is often credited as the nation's first true wine connoisseur. Long before he was president, Abraham Lincoln had a brief venture in the liquor business. In 1833, he co-owned Berry and Lincoln, a general store and tavern in New Salem, Illinois. The establishment sold a variety of goods, including whiskey and other spirits, which were essential commodities in frontier America. Lincoln's time as a tavern owner was short-lived, and the business struggled financially. However, the experience gave him insight into the social and economic role of alcohol in American life. Interestingly, despite his early involvement in the liquor trade, Lincoln rarely drank and later supported temperance efforts. His stance reflected the growing debate over alcohol in 19th century America, which would eventually lead to prohibition decades later. Harry S. Truman, the 33rd president, was well known for his love of bourbon. Unlike some presidents who enjoyed a casual drink, Truman had a rather disciplined drinking habit. His morning routine included a brisk walk followed by a shot of bourbon before breakfast. One of Truman's favorite brands was Old Grandad, a Kentucky bourbon known for its high rye content. He also enjoyed sipping on Wild Turkey and Missouri's own J. Rigger and Company whiskey. Truman's appreciation for bourbon was not just personal, it symbolized his Midwestern roots and straightforward approach to life. Martin Van Buren, the eighth president, earned the nickname Blue Whiskey Van due to his fondness for whiskey. His reputation as a heavy drinker was well known, and his moniker reflected his penchant for the spirit. Van Buren's drinking habits were a part of his public persona, though they did not overshadow his political career. Franklin Pierce, the 14th president, was open about his reliance on alcohol. After his presidency, he was quoted saying, "What can an ex-president of the United States do except get drunk?" Pierce's heavy drinking was both a personal struggle and a public concern, reflecting the pressures and challenges he faced during his tenure. Andrew Johnson, who assumed the presidency after Lincoln's assassination, had a well-documented history of alcohol use. His drinking habits were so pronounced that they became a part of contention during his impeachment proceedings. Some accounts suggest that his intemperance affected his public appearances and decision-making processes. Ulysses S. Grant, a celebrated Civil War general and the 18th president, was known for his drinking habits. During the war, he reportedly consumed whiskey to cope with the stresses of battle. However, as president, Grant made efforts to curb his drinking, especially during public and official events. Grover Cleveland, the first president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, enjoyed beer and was known to consume it regularly. During his first campaign, his opponents criticized his drinking habits, but Cleveland's straightforward acknowledgement endeared him to the many voters as a man of the people. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd president, had a penchant for cocktails, particularly martinis. He was known to mix drinks for his guests and even held a daily children's hour cocktail gathering during Prohibition. Roosevelt's enjoyment of social drinking played a role for his advocacy for the repeal of Prohibition, leading to the 21st Amendment. Lyndon B. Johnson, the 36th president, favored scotch and soda as his drink of choice. He was known to enjoy it during his ranch retreats in Texas and even had a button installed in his car that allowed him to signal his Secret Service agents when he needed a refill. Johnson's drinking was also a political tool. He often used cocktail hours to persuade and negotiate with lawmakers. However, his staff was instructed to serve him weaker drinks so that he could stay sharp while others indulged more freely. Presidential drinking habits have varied widely in recent history. Some, like Franklin D. Roosevelt, were known for their fondness for cocktails. FDR famously enjoyed martinis and even served them at the White House during Prohibition. John F. Kennedy, on the other hand, was a fan of daiquiris and French champagne. However, not all modern presidents have embraced alcohol. George W. Bush publicly shared that he had given up drinking in 1986 after struggling with overconsumption in his younger years. Donald Trump, too, is a lifelong teetotaler, citing his older brother's battle with alcoholism as his reason for abstaining. And who can forget Jimmy Carter's brother and Billy Beer? From George Washington's whiskey empire to Thomas Jefferson's wine obsession and Lincoln's time as a tavern keeper, alcohol has played a surprising role in American presidential history. These stories give us a glimpse into how our leaders have shaped and have been shaped by the world of spirits. This wraps up the special President's Day episode of Fermented Adventure, the podcast. If you enjoyed this dive into history, be sure to subscribe, check out our past interviews, including our discussion with Steve Bayshore at Mount Vernon. Cheers to history, heritage, and the enduring legacy of fermentation.